Mom, we're about to get into an interesting section. And I think in order to do this, we have to make an interesting distinction between two words. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, well, before we read verses 16 to 22, where Paul's nephew actually intervenes and foils a plot to murder Paul, the very plot that was just hatched here, I would love to take just a minute and talk about the difference between two words that we probably don't throw around a whole lot, one more than the other. One is providence, and one is miraculous. So, providence versus miracles. Noelle, talk to us about miracles because like I said, this is a word that we actually do tend to throw around a little bit. Oh, we're praying for a miracle. God did a miracle
Yeah,
last
yeah,
week. Is we kind of loosely use that term, but are we using it correctly?
yeah. So miracles, we see a lot of them in the Bible. And we see Jesus doing a lot of miracles in the book of Acts. We've seen a lot of cool miracles. And you can identify a miracle because they all have the same set of characteristics and necessarily have those characteristics. So the first characteristic of a miracle is that God has to suspend the natural order of the world to accomplish his will. So this is something that defies all the laws of science and physics and in any normal course of action cannot occur. And it's really fun actually if you want to learn a little bit about miracles in the Bible to go online and read a bunch of people trying to explain away the miracles of Jesus and
Yeah.
the absolute like intellectual
Yeah.
backflips they have to do to try to explain how these things are possible and they can't. And so that's when we say it suspends the natural order. It is outside the realm of what's possible. On top of that, it's obvious. When Jesus turns the water into the wine, people aren't like, this water tastes a little sour. It was like, this is wine. Like, this is so clear what's going on. There is no question as to whether a miracle occurred. There's no question as to what happened. It is so obvious. They're inexplicable in the natural realm. They are rare, so you don't see it happening all the time. If it did, it would rewrite the laws of science and the laws of physics to
Mhm.
then be explainable. They're supernatural, and these are two components that I think are super important. One is it's efficacious. We've used this word before, but all this means is that it serves a distinct purpose, that it is not just on whimsy for fun, it's not superfluous or perfunctory. It serves a very specific purpose. It effects some change for some purpose. And then it's observable. So it has to be something that you can actually see, observe, touch, feel, taste in the case of the wine. It can't be, something just kind of happening under the surface that somebody's giving lip service to. You have to actually see the results and the ramifications of it to know that it's real. And we tend to call a lot of things miracles that actually don't meet these criteria. Um, but Mom, give some context for us on what this actually plays out as in our worlds.
Sure. Well, I think that again, we toss the word around a lot, and we're going to talk about providence here in just a second to kind of compare those and contrast those. But with the miracles, there's a lot of people, for instance, on television that will be, they're healing people, and someone will come up, oh, I've had chronic back pain for years, and then oh, they put their hands on them, oh, I'm healed. Well, I can't. How do I know? Like if you got no arm and somebody touches you and you suddenly have a physical flesh and blood arm attached, okay, I buy it. That's a miracle. but this whole like you were saying under the surface thing is kind of interesting. And I think when we focus a lot on miracles and always looking for God, and I don't want to minimize the fact that God is capable of doing
And he
absolutely
does.
anything he wants to do. And he
Yeah.
does do that. But when that's your sole focus is only looking for miracles, what you are missing around you is God's providence, which is
Yeah.
not rare. This is everywhere. I mean, Noelle
Constant.
and I, when we were going over this before we logged on with you guys, we both just said we could sit here for hours off the top of our head with no preparation and tell you story after story after story after story after story of God intervening, but using completely natural means to do it. So let's
Yeah.
talk about providence real quick. I don't want to belabor the point, but providence is when God uses just the natural order of things, how he created the world to run in order to accomplish his will. It's subtle. In fact,
Yeah.
it's so subtle that people who don't believe in Jesus or God might look at the same circumstance and say, that was just coincidence, that God had nothing to do with that. It was merely coincidental. It's common, it's constant.
Yeah.
It uses, like I said, just the normal functions of life. And the examples go on and on and on. Noelle,
Yeah.
just give us, can you give us, pick either a miracle that you've seen or give us a providential thing that you've seen
Okay.
in real
And
life, in real life.
before I do this, I will say this to the point. It could be chalked up to coincidence, right? By those who don't believe. The way that we as Christians know it's not coincidence is because it happens over and over and over and over again as a just standard part of the Christian walk. And this is why when Mom and I were talking about it earlier, like we could go for hours talking about the providence of God in our lives. One of the most incredible for me was that on my third day in Seattle, I walked into a leasing office and met a young man who was a leasing office who leased the apartment for me, who brought me to church, who introduced me to an incredible community of believers. And because of this apartment, because I walked in there, I had a church and I had a community of believers and I had places to serve. And on day 3, living in Seattle as a 19-year-old, I had incredible Christian community that I'd never had before. That is the providence of God. Everything about that was very natural. I went on Google. It was the first thing that popped up for some reason. I walked in. That just happened to be the leasing agent I got, who was a born again believer, who loved evangelism, who happened to ask me the right questions so that I said I was looking for a church. All of those things, kind of coincidence, right? Except that they happen constantly and over and over and over again. And in just sort of the normal vernacular, I might even refer to that as a miracle, because in my life, that was just, it was a miraculous happening. It was wonderful. But it's important to note the difference between it, because if we get really focused in on miracles in the technical sense above, where we're looking for something supernatural or impossible to happen, we miss the things God is doing on the daily, using humans to do, and we don't get to notice and enjoy and just marvel in the constant brilliant work of God in our lives. And I think that's why this distinction is important, because we've seen in the book of Acts God do incredible miracles. And maybe you've even seen some miracles in your life. I was telling Mom a story about my pastor's wife, who had a terrible accident when she was 17 and injured herself so badly that the doctor said, you can't have children. You'll never have children, because if you look at this MRI, you can see you cannot have children. And she just gave birth to her 3rd child, which is not possible. And she shouldn't have been able to do that, except every time they were in that delivery room with these children who were born healthy and safe and happy, she could tell them, I shouldn't be able to have this child. And you can go look at my medical records as to why this is not possible. And yet God has provided miraculously. That's a miracle. That's supernatural. That's impossible. That's obvious. And it's efficacious, so that every time they're in that delivery room, they shared the gospel with the doctors and the nurses there. And then similarly, you get the providence of God just over and over again in your life. We're about to see the providence of God in this story. We're about to see God work through people, work through humans to accomplish incredible goals and accomplish his will. Mom, why is it that God generally, especially in the American church, the Christian church today, why is it that we see him work more in providence, more in this day-to-day, almost mundane working than we do in miracles?
You know, I would love to pose that to the group. So you tell us, because I don't think it's any stretch of imagination to say, I see way more providence of God than I see miracles. I don't think there's anyone here who would say it's kind of flipped for me. I see more miracles, but you do. So start commenting, but you do hear of them actually far more on the other side of the globe, especially
Miracles, yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, miracles. In Muslim countries, I often hear of just really inexplicable, supernatural things that happen in those regions.
Answering the question though, why do we see more of God's providence than miracles in our lives? Carolyn says that's how he shows us that he loves us. Susie says because God is showing us personally just how close he is to us. Becca says, I think it's so cool that God chooses to use other humans to perform his work in our lives. So
love
good.
That.
Kim says we have the Bible and church. We don't need the proof of miracles to validate who Christ is, who God is. Wonderful point. Sandy says miracles happen every day. We just need to look for them. Karen says God is revealing himself to us. I love these answers. Let's talk about what Becca said quickly. She says, I think it's so cool that God chooses to use other humans to perform his work in our life. Mom, talk about that, because this is something that we mentioned.
Yeah, well, we were talking beforehand again that when Jesus left this earth, he gave the Great Commission to people to accomplish. He could have said, these people are losers. I am tired of them and working with them. I can do this so much better myself without them, and just then become all about the miraculous. And I mean, he had every right to do that because he's God and he can do what he wants. But for reasons I will never totally understand, at least not on this side of heaven, for some reason, in his gracious, loving kindness, he lets us in on his plans. He uses us. He doesn't have to do it, but he does. And he uses the natural realm, which in some ways is more miraculous than a miracle. If you think about it, like all the moving parts and pieces and all the people in the different places. I'll just tell a really quick story, and then we promise we will get to the scripture and move on. I don't want to belabor it, but it's such a great topic. So one time I was walking into a grocery store, and I'll do this from time to time. I was on the way and I'll say, Lord, if there's anything that you need done in here today, not that I'm capable of it, but if you will help me and you will show me, I'm your girl. So whatever you need done, you just let me know, and I'm gonna make it really clear. Make it clear, because I'm not super bright. So I was at the checkout, and this lady ahead of me was checking out her groceries, and she had an air mattress of all things at the end of her groceries. And when the cashier went to scan it, she said, oh, before you scan that, she said, could you just tell me the price on it? I don't know what the price is. So she did a few things, and I couldn't hear what she said, but I just saw the woman's body language, and she just slumped over and her head went down, so sad. And she said, I don't want it. I don't want it. And right there, I was like, Lord, you want me to buy an air mattress today? Okay, I will. And it was one of those stores where they make you bag your own groceries, so people have to stay a long time afterwards. So I was pretty sure I had a moment. So she went off to bag her groceries, and so when I got to the cashier, I said, before you ring up my groceries, can you tell me how much that air mattress is? And she just looked at me like, what is the deal with the air mattress today? So she's like, okay. So she tells me how much it is. And I, in my heart, I was like, Lord, I will do it. Whatever it is, I will buy it. But please, 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 please don't make it more than $50, because I'm going to have to go home and tell my husband I spent all this money on an air mattress. And I think she said like $15. Really. Are you serious? That's all? And that woman couldn't afford to buy a $15 air mattress. I mean, I almost got her 10. So I said, I'll take it. So she's like, okay, whatever. So she rings up my few groceries. I didn't have too many. And I walked over to the lady who was bagging groceries, and I said, excuse me, I just wanted to give you something. And I handed her the air mattress, and her face was just completely like shocked, blank, didn't know quite what was going on. I said, look, I saw what happened back there. And I just want you to know that even though it's kind of for me, it's really not for me. The God of the universe sees you. He saw you, and he put it in my heart to make sure that you got your air mattress. So it's from him. I just got to be the conduit today. And she burst into tears, threw her arms around me. This is Pennsylvania, where we don't hug on a normal basis. This, not even in COVID, like it's just something doesn't happen, especially between strangers. She hugged and hugged and hugged and cried and got my shoulder all wet. And finally she stood back and she said, I wanted to get this for my mother-in-law. I just got married and we live in this tiny apartment. We don't have a bed for her, and she's coming to visit from Tennessee. She said, I wanted to give her an air mattress to sleep on so she wouldn't have to sleep on the hard floor, but I couldn't afford it. And then she kind of stopped and she said, my mother-in-law is always telling me, I'm praying for you. God is real and I'm praying for you. And then I was like, okay, now I'm going to start crying, because what she doesn't know is I'm pretty sure that her mother-in-law does know Jesus. And she is praying that God would put somebody in her daughter-in-law's path who would share Jesus with her. And I got to do that in this grocery store just a little bit. I invited her to church and I just said, you tell your mother-in-law that her prayers were to some extent answered today. And she goes, okay, I'll tell her. So that's just another example of, it feels like a miracle, but there was nothing suspended about the natural for that whole story to take place. It was just merely providential, God putting me in the right place at the right time and her at the right place at the right time and all the circumstances. And some lady in Tennessee got her prayers partially answered that day. Well, I just think it's awesome.
It's
Someday in
amazing.
heaven, we can sit around and we can talk for eternity about all the stuff that we remember that God did.